These are the men of Norforce, an elite group of soldiers prepared to defend the northern reaches of Australia. This is not the first time Aborigines have been trained to defend the vulnerable top end, their homeland. "50 years ago, when invasion by the Japanese seemed imminent, their fathers and grandfathers with unheralded acts of bravery served here on the front line, a fact unknown to the rest of the nation. The northern regions of Australia are closer to Asian shores than to any of the urban areas of the south, and has always been exposed to foreign influence, including invasion. For centuries, Aborigines had had more experience with Asians than they had with the gentry of the Australian south. As isolated and desolate as the area seems, this Aboriginal land had been a major fishing ground for the Macassans, from what is now Indonesia, long before the Europeans called Australia home. And this region was also well known to the Japanese. As early as the turn of the century, Japanese ships roamed the coast pearling and gathering sea slugs, a delicacy in the Orient. These pearlers and treepangers often used Aborigines as labourers and even river pilots to navigate the treacherous coastal waters. The Japanese knew this northern coastline often more intimately than white Australians, those they would soon call the enemy.
When I came up first in 1941, I remember seeing the Japanese pearling luggers going up and down the strait. They had numbers on their boats, and they were also, as well as being the thing that concerned people, as well as pearl gathering, they were girl gathering. They'd buy the girls, some of them, off the people, the older people, or probably might be a bag of flour or something, the value of a few pounds as were in those days. And then when the tragedy was that when they finished with them, they go back to Japan. Getting near Japan, they couldn't take them into Japan because of health reasons, and they just threw them overboard.
The traditional working relationships between the Japanese and the Aborigines began to deteriorate, especially in Arnhem Land.
The Japanese had been working in Port Bradshaw and had been firing at the Aboriginals in Port Bradshaw, and that has made them very hostile.
Fred Gray, pearler and treepanger, was the first white man ever authorised by the Commonwealth Government to set up permanent camp in the forbidden region of Arnhem Land. He witnessed firsthand the emerging hostilities between the Japanese and their Aboriginal hosts. Aborigines of Culloden Bay had had enough, and they resorted to their own form of justice.
And we found a dead Japanese on the beach in front of the Culloden Bay People's Camp, where I'd slept the night before. And then we went on to the Japanese camp, and we found, I think it was 3 men in the water and 1 at the camp itself. And there were 2 men missing then.
A police party was sent into Arnhem Land to arrest the killers. One policeman was speared and the others were driven back to Darwin. The three sons of Wongo, head men of the Balamumu clan, were finally arrested and sent to prison for the murders. In Canberra, Cabinet considered sending a force to capture Wongo and punish the Balamumu clan, an act that could have resulted in a virtual war with the Aborigines in eastern Arnhem Land. Melbourne anthropologist Donald Thompson offered a more rational, alternative plan.
Donald, knowing what that would mean to the people, felt that there was something that he could do as an anthropologist to make people understand that there was some real cause for this trouble in Arnhem Land.
Thompson was able to obtain the release of Wongo's sons from Darwin's Fanny Bay jail, and he had the support of Fred Gray. Their freedom was the first step in Thompson's grand plan.
I spoke up for them, and when I had finished, Judge Wells said to me, "What do you want me to do, hang them?" And I said, "No," I said, "I don't want them hung at all." I said, because I think that what they did, they were frightened of the guns, and that a light sentence, I said, would probably help to deter other killings, because there had been a few around the coast previous.
The Japanese pearler's graveyard in Broome is testimony to a long history of commercial and cultural ties with Northern Australia. Yet as Japan's global intentions became clearer, its near unlimited use of our waters was now being reassessed. In fact, in the Northern Territory, there were widespread fears that with nearly 1,000 Japanese crewmen in and around Darwin on pearling luggers, that if Japan declared war on the British Empire, Darwin could have been taken without a shot being fired.
Yeah, I used to be one of the crew sometimes on a lugger, which used to carry cargo from Thursday Island. And Thursday Island had about 400, 500 luggers that were manned by Japanese, and a section of the town was called Jap Town. And we knew quite well that if the war came, that we would be in the thick of it. But they confiscated all the luggers, and they interned all the Japs in Thursday Island. Then they took over the boarding house, and underneath the floor they found it was full of ammunition and firearms.
At a time when General MacArthur was warning of an invasion of Australia, Donald Thompson had already formulated a plan to create a guerrilla unit of the Aborigines he had helped in the past. The Thompson Commandos, called the Northern Territory Special Reconnaissance Unit, was approved by the Army. But first, there was the delicate job of explaining to Wongo the sudden change in policy.
He had to tell Wongo that he was coming to recruit the natives to his coast watch and to kill any Japanese that came ashore. Wongo couldn't understand that because Wongo's sons had been imprisoned for killing the Japanese several years before.
Thompson's other problem was to persuade traditional tribal enemies to join forces to fight the Japanese. By Aboriginal law, the only way age-old disputes could be settled was by bloodletting, through the ritual of spearing. Once these tribal disputes were settled, formation of guerrilla units got underway. The Thompson Commandos were led by section commanders. Leader of one unit was Raiwilla, one of the few full-bloods enlisted officially in the Australian Army. Another was Wongo's son, Natjalama, one of those imprisoned for the Callan Bay massacres. And Binjapuma, known as Slippery, who had been a leader of a band of outlaws in Arnhem Land. Military training followed. Aborigines were taught not to be frightened by gunfire and were drilled in basic skills in the use of firearms and machine guns.
If a Japanese had come ashore and we'd told them to kill them, I don't think any Japs would have ever got back on a boat again because they'd killed them before They'd landed at Caledon Bay, and they'd also killed some down, if I remember, at Blue Mud Bay from off the luggers. And they were adept to sneaking up, and as we told them that to kill the Japanese, they'd kill them. There'd be no worry about that. I don't think any Japanese would get back on the boat.
In 1941, there was nothing between the Japanese-held territories of the Dutch East Indies and Australia, except for 100 miles of open sea and a very determined Aboriginal commando unit waiting for them on the coast. Australia was about to fight for the first time a war on its own shores. The Imperial Japanese Army and Navy were now on our very doorstep. Singapore fell, and the Japanese occupied much of the Dutch East Indies, only 100 miles from our shores.
On the 19th of February 1942, about 9 o'clock in the morning, Father McGrath and Brother Comerford and Peter de Hare, the man who built the church and all the things around here, they were having breakfast and there was a noise outside of aeroplanes, and in came some of the Aboriginals and singing out, "Father, Father, Japanese aeroplane." So they ran outside and they saw the big mob of aeroplanes heading for Darwin.
And I saw this mobs of planes, hundreds of planes went cross over that Paruya. So I called out to Father. Father, I said, come then. I said, so Father came then and he said, those enemies, and he said to me, run for your life, he said to me, Father.
And he went to the radio room and he grabbed the radio and he put a message over, almost repeated what they said, big mob Japanese plane bound for Darwin. And that was put over in code, and then 8 of them broke the formation and swung in, and they apparently were attracted by the DC-3 American plane with a big star on the old aerodrome. And then the first bullets on Australian soil landed on the old aerodrome here on Bathurst Island. They put a shell in every seat, I saw them. And then they machine gunned and shelled to some extent the church. And then they saw the aerial over the radio room, and then they machine gunned that.
And he rang up message on the air, and they was only laughing. They thought he was foolish. So he was trying his best to tell them that enemy planes are going over in Darwin. But they didn't believe. Since we heard this bombing of, we could see the smokes from down, bombing of Darwin, you know.
The shock was the extent of the raid, the number of machines employed on such a little place as Darwin. They came in from a direction that was, well, we really didn't, none of us expected them to come from that direction in which they did come. Of course, the siren went, and I, like everyone else, thought, oh, well, righto, take shelter. You know, you often hear people say, oh, if a bombing did come, you can just imagine all these natives racing for the bush. Well, here was an instance where such was not the case.
Perhaps the first Aboriginal fatality in the war was the maid of the Northern Territory Administrator, Daisy Martin, crushed under the rubble of the official's house. No records show how many other Aboriginal people were killed during the Darwin raids, but Daisy Martin would not be the last Aborigine to lose her life from enemy guns in her own country. While Japanese commander Mitsuo Fuchida said his raid on Darwin was like smashing an egg with a sledgehammer, these seasoned combat pilots fresh from the attack on Pearl Harbor did not depart Australia unscathed. The first Japanese prisoner of war ever taken in Australia was captured when his plane crashed on Melville Island. He was caught single-handedly by a Tiwi, an Aborigine from Bathurst Island.
After the crash, that Japanese fella got out the plane and started wandering around in the bush. He didn't know there were Aboriginal people camping there nearby. So he was wandering around, walked through the bushes. He finally came out to the camp.
She was feeding her baby and she would look up. Oh, she caught her son in the arm, grabbed her son, jump. Oh, she would call out to me. Oh, Murintani, she said. She didn't say Japanese. Murintani, oh.
And all of a sudden, all those men and women started running. And they left that one little boy lying on a blanket, the shady tree. So we went and picked him up and carried him around.
Well, then I looked back, I saw this Japanese carrying that baby on his arm. And I told that lady.
And this fella, his name is Matthias Ulumura. He had a little tomahawk. So he ran and hid behind the tree. So the Japanese fella came by and then passed him, and then Matthias came behind him with a little tomahawk. He pointed at his back, said, "Stick him up." So he stood like this with that baby, and he grabbed that boy, little boy off him, and then he took the pistol.
This wasn't the last time the enemy was taken prisoner on Australian soil. Beatrice Mankara talks about her father, known on Bathurst Island as Line-em-up Louis, who captured 5 Japanese airmen, armed only with a stick.
Then Father Mugara sent message on the air. While is that my father got 5 Japanese. He did, and so the plane came over.
The fact that those first to feel the impact of the war were Aborigines, that the first Japanese POW taken on Australian soil was captured by an Aborigine, is unknown throughout most Australia. But these tales are legend up here and are passed down through the generations by traditional song and dance, the Karoba. From February 1942 to November 1943, Darwin was bombed a total of 64 times, and each time the Japanese were met by Australian and Allied fighters. Airmen on both sides were lost in this tropical no-man's land. Some of those who bailed out survived. During a reconnaissance mission to Ambon in the East Indies, one Dutch B-25 bomber tangled with Jap fighters, losing one of its 2 engines. The bomber limped home to Darwin on one engine, 750 miles away. Captain Rudy Swanner brought the crippled plane in on the beach at Melville Island, miraculously without loss of life or serious injury. Here too, Aborigines came to the rescue. Japanese aircraft attacked Australia 97 times, but were always met with fierce resistance from the Aussies, Brits and the Yanks. Lying scattered across the north are hundreds of wrecks, ghostly reminders of the aerial duels fought in our skies, and every one of them with a story. This is all that is left in Broome Harbour of a fleet of flying boats carrying Dutch refugees from Timor. Charlie D'Antoine was refuelling one of the planes when the Japanese attacked.
And when I looked to the photos, they were but doesn't plane no more was on fire. And the water was did cover with fire, sheet of flame. Oh, was there about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, next minute my plane got on fire.
As Charlie swam for the safety of shore, he rescued a woman and her child, for which he was awarded a medal for his heroism by Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands. Not far up the coast, a Dutch DC-3, also carrying refugees, crash-landed in Carnet Bay after being shot down by the Japanese. Aborigines found the survivors and took them to the pearling mission at Beagle Bay. What they and the missionaries did not know was that the plane carried $20 million of Dutch diamonds and currency, bound for the Commonwealth Bank in Sydney to keep it out of the hands of the Nazis. And whilst half of the diamonds were recovered by the authorities, the other half was found by lugger crews, who, it is reported, buried much of the remaining $10 million at the base of a pandanus tree. On Melville Island, the only land between Darwin and Japanese-occupied territories, a little-known mobile unit of Aborigines, called the Gribble Patrol, was formed to rescue downed airmen, provide them with shelter, and return them to their units. Richard Miller's father was a member of this notable brigade.
Yes, my father, he was a captain himself on the ship. Gribble Patrol was to protect this island, Garden Point and Snake Bay. He used to send patrol out right on the coast to see if there's any Japanese survived on the island.
Another patrol, this one located just across the harbour from Darwin, was the Black Watch, also with a record of many rescues in this barren coastal area. One celebrated rescue that has become legend up here in the north is the story of American Lieutenant Clarence Sanford, whose fighter crashed in the Gulf of Carpentaria after a dogfight with the Japanese. Two Aborigines fishing on Bremer Island near Nhulunbuy found Sanford's body washed up on the beach and carried him 30 miles through the scrub to the mission at Yirrkala.
He was given to the church, and of the church and the community. Rather, kill him. If we go to find the Japanese there, they're going to kill him easily. But they found the different, our friends, in American, because they've been having a Japanese problem in Callan Bay before. And they've been giving the problem to all Aboriginal people.
Nevertheless, there was concern by airmen about what would happen to them if they were to crash in this hostile land. Rumours were rife that cannibal natives waited eagerly below. It was myth, of course, but still the thought of cannibalism was not far off for George Booth and his crew when they ditched their plane at the headwaters of the Cato River in a little-known region of Arnhem Land. They built a raft from the empty fuel tanks of the plane, poled their way down the river toward open sea, drifted across Arnhem Bay and landed on Elcho Island. 33 days after the crash, they came out of the bush telling one of the most extraordinary sagas of the war.
The drag along Elcho Island was frightening because we could feel our strength going finally and utterly. We'd lost an awful amount of weight and we couldn't find water. We did have a first encouraging sign when we saw on the beach, after a long prayer session, a footprint. This was the first sign. It was the real Robinson Crusoe effect of seeing that footprint and knowing that there had to be blacks somewhere. That same day we found a path leading into the scrub. We followed it through and we found this giant canoe. Near the canoe we found some dilly bags, which I fondly imagined might contain some food, and the first thing I thought was something that looked like a coconut. And of course, once again, the idea of cannibals came uppermost. So we were a little bit nervous that night. We didn't have a fire. And the following day we hoped we'd meet the blacks and that they would be friendly. Well, Frank and I were having a swim and we sort of looked along the beach, and there was this very, very tall black. He appeared to be about 7 feet tall, but as he came more closely we decided that he was carrying a baby on his shoulders. He appeared to be unarmed. We were nervous. Frank's pistol was beyond reach at that stage. Anyway, he walked up to us and met us with a great friendly grin. And immediately Frank and I did a war dance. With what little strength we had left, we were finished. Everything now was over to this man whom we knew as Paddy. It wasn't until some time later we found that was his mission name. His tribal name was Tiwi. But he and his tribe were absolutely magnificent. And we knew then that we were saved. It was a question of finding out from Paddy where was safety. Anyway, we found out that it was 5, maybe 7 days by canoe to Milingimbi. But it's the last day that stays in my memory. It was about 25 miles, and Paddy rode the whole distance, some 13 hours, and we arrived at Milingimbi at 10 o'clock at night, not far ahead of a rather unpleasant storm. I've been in this house for over 40 years, and its name is Tiwi, in honour of his memory.
The Snake Creek ammunition depot is buried in the Gold-rich hills south of Darwin and well away from the populated areas. Gangs of 60 Aborigines loaded 3 ton of bombs onto the rail cars each hour. Today, it is a no-man's land of unexploded ordnance, rusting under the tropic rains. The use of Aboriginal labour enabled troops to be used elsewhere. There was a variety of tasks only Aborigines would perform, including mustering cattle, working in butcheries and salting hides. Some even went retrieving magpie geese for white officers. South of Darwin, on the only link to the rest of Australia, called the Track at Mataranka Siding, 300 Aborigines evacuated from Darwin were herded together in Aboriginal labour settlements. For the first time, Northern Aborigines experienced the white man's way of life, dealing with a cash economy and using amenities the whites took for granted. Some consider the war to be the single most influential change to occur in the communities. Before the actual outbreak of the war, the Air Force built airstrips alongside Aboriginal church missions where manpower was readily available. These became advanced operational bases staging areas for the Allied bomb runs from Australia to the Japanese-occupied territories.
This is the type of strip that we built because the Air Force asked the mission. I had about 86 men altogether, and the strip that we built was 1,700 yards long by 200 yards wide. It was all done with handwork, shovel, hoe, pick, crowbar, and the only machinery they gave us was a forest devil. To be about 6 men on this forest devil, and if the cable broke, you get the whole forest devil on top of you, about 700 pounds in weight. And it was hard yakka. We started in 1939, and by 1942 we had it completely finished.
For wages of tobacco, food and cloth, Aborigines were contracted by the missions with signature of a thumbprint to build the vital airstrips along the north. One such base was at Milingimbi on the east coast of Arnhem Land, the home of the British 54 Squadron. Today the strip is nothing more than sawgrass and anthills. The people of Milingimbi not only built the strip themselves, but once the military arrived, they offloaded supplies, including drums of aviation fuel. Because of the strong tides and shallow waters, the drums were thrown overboard. Aborigines would swim after the drums and push them ashore.
Had to roll them all over the beaches. And we lost toenails, fingernails, toe joints, you know, from the bombs rolling on it.
Milingimbi was attacked 3 times in 1943. 2 Aborigines were killed, 3 wounded.
Machine gun come up, bing, 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 bing. I get up from tree, more come up, I missed him. Japan fight, Aboriginal people fight, European people fight, Aboriginal people, I get up, but me now, I kill him, I've been with him, that's Japan.
With this corroboree, the Western Australian mission community of Columbaroo, known then as Drysdale River Mission, remembers its tragic involvement as site of an advanced operational base. Here, the dancers depict the people fleeing the Japanese attack, bombs intended for the airstrip, which devastated the settlement instead. Columbaroo, certainly one of the most beautiful communities of the north, is a mixture of half a dozen different Aboriginal clans, gathered together by the forces of guaranteed tucker and some good old-fashioned religion. American, Australian and Dutch bombers pounded enemy-occupied territory just 100 miles away. Columbaroo, once a white community, was suddenly in the front line of war.
In September 1943, the Japanese came across from Timor, come across from those hills over here, and bombed and strafed the mission. It was clearly painted with a large cross on the roof, and on the roof of the monastery was the word mission. But these planes, they attacked for close on 20 minutes, so bombed the place, knocked the church down, part of the monastery, all the roof went off. And the people were in slit trenches down at the back of the monastery, down near those coconut trees. And the priest was there with all the people, and a direct hit the trench he was in, and killed him instantly, and killed the woman and 5 children.
And my daddy was looking for me. He was digging the hole to see whether I was killed there. So my father followed us there. And he said, Father is killed, and the children, and that my cousin sister with the baby. How many bombs was? 1 bomb was with children. 1 bomb was here with father. Another bomb fell behind close to the river. Maybe 2 or 3 bombs there, but they never returned back. They never returned back to bombing to kill us more.
The mothers of Kalumburu still mourn the loss of their loved ones.
My daughter buried here.
Tokyo Rose of Radio Japan boasted Drysdale Mission airstrip and many planes were destroyed. But the strip was never touched. The mission virtually wiped out.
Generation of young men was coming from near and far to volunteer like their fathers in 1914, offering their lives for their country in that nonchalant Australian way. Give it a go, mate. You've got to be in it to win it.
In the urban south, far from the realities of the front line in the north, enlistment was established as a privilege of whites and those Aborigines of European descent. Full-blood Aborigines were exempted, despite pressure calling for a fair go, citizenship and equality.
The laws on the book said that no Aboriginal can need to fight for this country because it was no longer their country. They weren't citizens of the country, and therefore they need not serve.
Full-bloods in the north generally served only in de facto units. And those part Aborigines who were integrated into the services had distinctive careers. Perhaps the best known is Reg Saunders, the first Aboriginal Commission officer. Reg, whose father served in the first AIF, was decorated for service in 3 wars. Years later, Reg was awarded the MBE.
When it did come along, I thought, well, at last I'm an Australian.
Queenslander Leonard Waters enlisted into the RAAF and became Australia's first Aboriginal fighter pilot.
We knew at that time that, well, the free world as we knew it was in pretty dire straits. In 1942, we didn't know which way it was going to go, and the Japs were getting closer all the time, so we thought we'd go and do our part.
Yet the Prime Minister of the day, John Curtin, wrote to his Minister of the Army telling him, if there was an invasion, it is considered that they would be prepared to help the enemy. It has been common talk among the natives that when the Japs come, they would be the boss.
The Japs used to tell the islanders and the Aboriginals that we are not coming back to fight Aboriginals, Torres Strait Island. We are coming back to fight the white man. I don't know whether it was trying to gain favor with them or not, but not one Aboriginal or Islander. It took their side, you know. Everybody was ready to fight the Japs, and we knew that they were our enemies.
All help to God. Most unusual guard this in all the Empire's armies. Original Aboriginal Anzacs. They're not in the army as a curiosity. They are volunteers in the service of the country they love. With fixed bayonets instead of the spears their forefathers carried, with bullets instead of boomerangs, the dark-hued diggers go into action. Now out of uniform into civvies for a change, like good soldiers ready to do or die. 6 little digger boys out on the spree. Half were torpedoed, and then there were 3.
The newsreel certainly amused white urban theatregoers, but the realities in the north were of greater concern. Those Aborigines who were not at the labour camps or in their communities building and guarding installations were often evacuated to southern compounds.
My parents were still on Angus Down when I was taken away by a Constable Bill McKinnon, who took me and my aunties. And I never ever saw my parents again.
Bob Randall's story is not unique.
Children of the Melville Island Mission Station arrive in Melbourne, where they await transfer to a country home. A little bewildered by it all at first, their shyness is soon conquered, and they're just happy kids on a corroboree. Many of them are half Japanese, daughters of pearl fishing fathers and Aboriginal mothers. Many again are almost white.
The mission that sheltered Bob Randall was directly under the flight paths of enemy warplanes, which occasionally dipped their wings in greeting of the children.
I'm delighted watching it, a group of us kids watching it and waving at the pilot. I was following, and then he leaned over on this plane like this, he swung his plane like this, and he just waved back at us, waved back at that. And then the missionary cop started hitting me with a stick to run and run. You know, for a while I was wondering who was my friend and who was my enemy. The guy, the missionary, beating me up, or the Japanese pilot waving at me.
Japan has today surrendered, and the last of our enemies is laid low. Peace has once more come to the world. Let us thank God for his great deliverance and his mercies. Long live the King.
As white Australia revelled in their victory, black diggers found they had little to celebrate. At home, their people lived much as they had before the war, and citizenship was no closer at hand. Public opinion of their fight for equality had slipped to the back burner. For a majority of Aborigines, the battle continued. 50 years later, those who served in guerrilla units, coastal patrols, or as labourers in the war zone in the north have yet to be recognised for their service and commitment. And for some, the account has yet to be settled.
Down on the thumbs.
Bob Hall, a historian at the Defence Academy in Canberra, was commissioned to investigate the long-running issue of compensation. The report was written 5 years ago, and it is yet to be acted upon.
There are about 150 Aborigines involved in various groups across North Australia, and I believe that the sort of figure, the ballpark figure that would cover them would be somewhere between $100,000 and perhaps $700,000. But I think the important issue, and I think an issue that would be equally as important as the money to many of the Aborigines involved, would be the recognition of their service from the Australian community, in particular things like the award of service medals and a place within the digger legend.
I think it's unfortunate if the common concept of a digger is that of a white Anglo-Saxon, because that was not accurate. It was not accurate, I know, in the First War, because my father served in the infantry in Flanders. It certainly wasn't factual in the last war.
There is plenty of evidence about that these people served, that they were involved in military operations and that they were expected to fight the Japanese had they landed in Australia.
I didn't come out with no bars on my shoulder, no ribbons on my chest, no money in my pocket, no deferred pay, no land to go back to and say, this is my land.
If people need compensating for services rendered during World War II, they should be, that compensation should come up. It should come up, and I would fully support it, and I'm sure the RSL would. We've always supported people that have been treated unjustly through the war, and we're still doing it, I might add, not only with black Australians, but with white Australians. Now, I say that, you know, most sincerely, that compensation, if it's due, give it to them. That's the least we can do.
50 years later, it's time Australia invited black diggers, those who were enlisted and those who served in a de facto capacity, into the legend of Anzac. Reg Saunders is one of the few Aborigines who knows how it feels.
Oh, great. Great. Medals, music, good little sorts running around, pats on the back. Great. I was a hero.
As far as the RSL's concerned, always it's been one Australia for all Australians. There were Aborigines on the Gallipoli Peninsula, and there were certainly Aborigines in World War I and in World War II on all fronts. No, of course, it should be. They are part and parcel of Anzac.
It would offend my sense of justice if those who served, whether in a de facto situation, such as in a reconnoitring or guerrilla capacity, did not receive, or their families did not receive, the same recognition and the same benefits that soldiers such as I myself received following the war.
Aborigines have been involved in every conflict for Australia, from the Boer War to Vietnam. Today, as these men of the Borroloola Patrol of Norforce train to defend Australia, they follow in the footsteps of their fathers and grandfathers, living the stories of their own that one day will be legend in their own communities and throughout the rest of Australia.